Okay, so I get why Lucy and I are going and all, but why exactly are you two going again? Gwen questioned as we see them all riding in some sort of transportation spacecraft. And Ben explains that while technically he's supposed to be going next year, it was just convenient to recertify for his bounty hunting license. At the same time, they were at the academy, and Kevin said that he was supposed to be reporting some things to the head of the academy, as they were also acting High Magister for the area of the Milky Way. Gwen was having a hard time reading the alien language, though Ben helped her to at least understand the basics of it enough that she could get the gist, while along the way she was trying to learn more about the classes and stuff that they were going to be taking, and it all sounded interesting to her. Lucy says that she's the first of her species to go to the academy, which was going to be really exciting for her, as she was looking forward to learning all new stuff about how the plumbers work and getting to eventually join their ranks. Kevin then tells her that she needed to curb some of that excitement. It's great to be happy to go, but remember that this is training after all, to which she nodded in response to that. Kevin and Ben were helping the girls find their dorm room while talking about the academy and Magister Holka when Lucy accidentally bumped into someone and apologized to them. The person who was in red-colored plumber gear tells her, "Eyes forward," calling her a larval dipteroid, to which Ben steps between them and asking if he'd care to repeat what he'd just said to his cousin. The guy recognizes Ben and immediately apologized, not knowing that Lucy was Ben's cousin. Gwen looked confused at the guy in the red armor along with the other two he'd been talking to, then tried to retreat away from Ben as she'd asked just what that was about exactly. And Kevin finally realizes that Gwen doesn't actually know all of Ben's reputation within the plumbers. He turned to Ben and asked if Gwen actually knew all of his plumber's history, to which Ben admits that she does not. Gwen asks what reputation, like she'd known he'd killed Vilgax, but the way they were talking, there was a lot more to it than that. Ben sighs and says that he'd explain it once they put their stuff down at their room, and soon found their correct dorm, letting the girls drop their stuff off and rest for a bit, though once they were ready they'd gone off to the main area. Ben accessed his records, showing them that when he was in the academy he'd received top marks, as well as having a symbol beside the red spot on his record certifications. Kevin showed that his marks were almost as high as Ben's, and that he'd had a different marking beside his red spot certification, confusing Gwen and Lucy as the latter questioned what the symbols were beside the red spots. Kevin went on to explain that the symbols represent the different levels of rankings and are placed according to skill level. Kevin's symbol was that of alpha level, the same as those guys in the red armor from earlier, and Ben's had a much harder to obtain symbol, as it was that of Omega Squadron, which are the best of the best. Absolute last resort, given the devastation they could cause in battle. The rune-like mark on the inside of the symbol shows that Ben is certified as a bounty hunter within any and all plumber territory. Gwen just looked confused at them, asking if they'd run that by her again. And Ben tells her, basically Kevin is second most dangerous rank and I'm top most dangerous rank. He'd overly simplified for her, to which she'd started to understand now why they were so afraid of Ben. While the Magister in charge of the academy walked into the room and greeted Ben and Kevin, asking how his two best students had been doing. Ben greeted Magister Holka like he was an old friend, as did Kevin, and they asked why Ben was there, as recertification wasn't until next year, and he'd answered that he decided to just go ahead and take care of that since the shuttle was already going to be on Earth at the time anyways, no point in making two trips. To which the Magister nodded, listening to that, and asked that while he and Kevin were there if the two would help in training the new recruits, and they said sure. The next day they'd met up with the other cadets. Among them was a rare sight to see, a young Rabonagander named Rook Blanco. Kevin took notice, telling Ben, "There's something you don't see every day," to which he'd nodded in agreement as Holka was yelling at the recruits, telling them that while they are there they will report to him, Levin, or Tennyson. This includes the Alpha Squad as well. One of them went to say something but stopped, knowing to keep their mouth shut. Holka tells them that during their training they will learn to work together as a team, and maybe one day they will be able to hopefully handle at least coming close to beating the likes of Kevin Levin, one of his most prized students to have ever graduated at this academy. One of the newbies then asked what they should do if they find themselves up against Ben, to which the Magister then glared at them and responded only a single word: run. This made everyone go wide-eyed, and Kevin steps in, telling them that he will be the teacher for long-range tactical combat and projectile weaponry, with Ben telling him that he will be helping teach short-range combat and melee weaponry. Holka will be the main instructor for everything else. They then told them to report to the firing range immediately. Training for them was hell, but at the same time it was worth all the effort to learn this stuff. The group were told that there would be no use of powers while training at the academy, which did make things both easier and a lot harder at the same time. The blades were hologram based, but the projectiles were quite real, such as the lasers from the academy blasters that they were using. Gwen and Lucy were both doing well, however, as was this Rook Blanco guy. Hulka had been talking to Ben and Kevin about something, as he'd mentioned that Levin's reports were thorough and informative, as were those by Ben, while he was dealing with his own recertification issues and everyone else was running drills. They'd asked what was up, and Hulka explained to the two of them about what was going on with a former cadet, one that Ben had known, as they were a student back when Ben was in the academy, and he'd nodded. Kolar. Ben spoke, nodding, remembering what had happened, and said they'd help with dealing with them. The three had actually set up the situation so Kolar was tricked into attacking them in a weapons depot, and the three began to fight him. Though the Blue Tetraman had gotten a lot stronger since the last time they dealt with him. The three were fighting with Kolar as an energy shield appeared in front of Ben when the Tetraman went to attack. Gwen walked out with some of the other cadets, including Rook Blanco, who had suggested that he surrender immediately, and as he and the other plumbers had the blasters at the ready. Though Lucy had her arms shaped into spike balls, ready to fight with a smile on her face. Ben smirked and spoke to Hulka, telling him that it seemed the cadets had learned to be plumbers after all, to which he nodded, saying that yeah, he guessed they had. Kevin says now's not the time to get sappy, as he'd absorbed the metal on the floor and shifted his arms into hammers ready for another round. After they'd arrested Kolar, they locked him in a stasis cell where he couldn't do, well, anything really. At least until it was time for his hearing. Ben had been recertified and they'd asked how the girls were doing, to which Gwen says that she'd gotten a 98 and Ben tells her that's good, that she'd managed to pass. Asking Lucy how she'd managed, she says she got an 87, which also meant that she had passed and they were now certified to be plumbers. After graduation ceremony, they were given their badges and told to pack up because the shuttle would be leaving soon. And after they'd done so, the four of them got on the ship ready to head on home, with Gwen admiring her badge, having a hard time believing that she'd actually become a plumber. It felt surreal.